Why are we here today? Well, if you're like me and of a certain age, you probably, or otherwise work clinically, you probably look at the death notices in the Herald most mornings. And if you look at the death notices in the Herald in the morning, you'll notice that the average age of non-Māori is quite old at the time of death, and the average age of Māori the time of death is quite young, and the difference is astounding and appalling. And that's why we're here. We're here because of inequities. Inequities are a gross breach of the Treaty of Waitangi and the equity provisions of the Treaty of Waitangi. And if that weren't enough, well, as a Māori parent, it's quite horrific to have that responsibility, that it's like having a family illness that's transmitted, that takes 10 years off your children's life, and you know it's going to happen, and you feel helpless, and you have to find a solution to do something about it, individually and collectively, because it's not just your own kids that are affected by this illness, it's the whole population. So morally and personally, we're involved in seeking the elimination of inequities. We know that the health system and our practice as health practitioners is involved in these inequities. Sure, there's a lot of other things involved too, but therefore as health practitioners and as people who train health practitioners, we are also involved, and therefore we must be cognizant of our practice and our teaching. Not only that, but inequities is a very sexy academic topic. If I can say sexy so early in the morning when it looks like coffee hasn't kicked in for some of you. But yeah, internationally as well as in New Zealand, people are trying to find how do we deal with inequities, how do we more than measure them, more than describe them, but actually intervene and change them. And we are well positioned in New Zealand and actually in Australasia to add to this academic literature. So that's why we're here today. We're here to make a difference, and we're here to have a great time. I'd like to acknowledge our Indigenous colleagues from Australia and from Norway who have joined us today, and make sure that they know how welcome they are here, and you'll get a chance to meet them over the traditional Māori food and drinks at morning tea and at lunchtime. So my job is to welcome you here, to use the rugby analogy, kick us off, and to introduce our first speaker this morning, Professor Ines Asher, who has contributed and is committed to the same goal of improving Māori health, both personally, professionally, and within the department she runs. So we think she's fantastic and a great colleague, and we welcome you, Ines.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Ko Mongo Wika, tōku maunga, ko Waitemata, tōku moana, ko Waipapa, tōku marae, no ingarangi me kotimana, oku tupuna, ko Ines Asher aho. So greetings to all of you, and my mountain is Mongo Wika, North Head. My water is the Waitemata Harbour. My marae is Waipapa Marae at the University of Auckland, and my ancestors are all from Scotland and England. And I'm Ines Asher, so that's what I just said. And I'm just going to reflect. Okay, that's fine as a backdrop. I'm going to reflect on my own story and just share a few reminiscences. So I'm a fifth generation Pākehā New Zealand through my father's side, and my mother was born in England. I was brought up in Avondale, and throughout my entire primary schooling, including intermediate school, I never met a Māori person, apart from my teacher in Standard 1 when I was 6, Beatrice Kerr, and she was a wonderful woman and taught us some Māori songs, dancing and stick games, which I absolutely loved and can remember to this day. I then went to Auckland Girls Grammar School, where there were quite a number of Māori girls, but none of them was streamed into my classes. That itself said something about the structure. But some of them excelled at sport, and I remember Merle Hunia, who was our sports captain for the school. We did have 3 girls come from Queen Victoria Māori Girls' School in the 7th form, 6A as it was then, and I remember how inept I felt in not understanding anything about where they came from and who they were, but I tried to be friendly, and we were friends in a kind of a certain level. Then I went to this Auckland Medical School in the first class, 1968. There was not one non-European in the class, apart from Chin Chan, a New Zealand-born Chinese man. So we had a different experience from those in medical school today. So I really met no Māori people, apart from my teacher when I was 6, until I started working as a doctor. And I think that would be true probably of a lot of people of my generation. It was, of course, before a lot of Māori people came to the cities. And that's when I started to meet Māori people in the hospital. And I remember being very touched by one particular girl, Nahuia, who was in hospital for about 6 months, 2 years running. I was a house surgeon registrar, and she had rheumatic fever. She was a beautiful girl, and I remember I was only about 10 years or so older than her, and I was just reflecting on and puzzled and wondering as to how this could be. And then went off to Canada, and having seen cases of rheumatic fever all the time, and in Montreal, when I was in Montreal for 3 years, and there was once in the 3 years there was a child in the hospital with rheumatic fever, and everybody went rushing to listen to the heart murmur, but of course I'd heard aortic incompetent and mitral incompetent heart murmurs so often that was my bread and butter. So before I went to Montreal, however, I went to Ruatoki, and I was privileged to be invited there through the university and the chairman of the District Health Board to do a survey of child health in Ruatoki. And I think through that period it was quite formative for me, and I really felt that very humbled by that experience, and I gained a tremendous respect for the people of Ruatoki, Tūhoe, and that's why I ended up speaking out after 2007 raids, because they were the people I felt were really my people, although I've got no biological connection. Anyway, as my career in paediatrics progressed, I'm a paediatrician, respiratory paediatrician. I saw more and more Māori and then Pacifica people coming into hospital with preventable diseases, and escalation of rates of diseases like bronchiectasis, which severely damages the lungs and can cause people to die in childhood or young adulthood. And I really started questioning a bit more about the whole context, and really probably only in the last sort of 15 to 20 years I've really made an active decision to try and learn a bit more about what's going on in my country, and learning a bit more about how the things have arisen and what we might be able to do about them. I was quite I've been very influenced by the Child Poverty Action Group, which I began to be part of in 1998, where I went to learn about some of the broader determinants of health, and of course they have a complete focus on trying to reduce and eliminate inequities. I started learning te reo in 2007, and I'd like to learn it more. About that time, about sort of 10-ish years ago, Ralph Pinnock and Rhys Jones set up within our department, I was head of department at that stage from 2002, having a Māori written case for our medical students, and I found that quite an amazing thing. And we still continue to have a Māori written case for a student's case write-up. And what I think was really terrific was that was set up so that anybody who is non-Māori could mark the case, and that's what we still do. And I think that's an exemplar of how you can gain some confidence as a non-Māori about Māori things, and learn and gain some confidence as to participate in the process of other people learning as well. So I think that's been something which has been really helpful and important for our department. Around the same sort of time, the New Zealand Child and Youth Epidemiology Service started producing really in-depth data, of which this is one piece, about child health outcomes in New Zealand, and in particular focus on inequities. And very recently, last year, Reese gave a terrific, inspiring lecture at Paediatric Update, which was really quite challenging for each of us to look at ourselves and learn more about what role we could have in Māori health. Above all, really, I've learnt most from my children and families I see. They've been my teachers and continue to be, and I feel quite embryonic in my own learning about Māori things and what to do. And I think that, you know, we're always on a journey, especially if we're Pākehā New Zealanders, we're on a journey to keep on learning, and that's why I've come today. And I wanted to share with you these slides. So this shows you a pattern of statistics with which we're all very familiar, and one of the real dangers in New Zealand is we're accustomed to these shocking inequities. There's about 11 children, most of them are under the age of 1, dying every year from pneumonia in New Zealand, and most of them are Māori and Pacifica. So I want to challenge ourselves with thinking that if these were the childhood pneumonia deaths, where European were way ahead of Māori and Pacifica, would more be done in New Zealand? And I see someone nodding their head. If anyone answers yes, well, I think that's why we're here. And we all have a role in trying to think about how we might do something about these huge inequities. I was touched by Fiona Cram, Māori research analyst, in her metaphor about life experiences affecting health and well-being of Māori children. For Pākehā children like myself and my own children, they have a life experiences like biking with the wind behind them, but for Māori children, it's like all their life experiences are like biking into the wind. Can we do something about that? And Reese, who will obviously speak about this during this session, I'm sure, challenged us in his talk about how do we become part of the solution. And I think that's how I look at it for myself. And he talked about being part of the solution through transformative change, including reducing the effects of colonisation on and racism in ourselves. And I might say to myself, well, hang on, I'm not a coloniser and I'm not racist, but I've been brought up in a society that has the legacy of colonisation, and the very fact that my life has been so separate from Māori people until I became a young adult doctor is a signal of the effect of colonisation on me. And those statistics I showed you are obviously a clear signal about racism, and I think, well, what part could I play in trying to do something about myself, within myself, that might address that? And one of the things, of course, I do is I speak about these statistics. So if you want to look at Reese's lecture, even after today when he's spoken to you probably quite a bit, you can access it through that link, and if you do it through Internet Explorer, it won't go up through Firefox, but it's a great lecture. And then finally, looking at ways to help us to move with our own learning. The Ministry of Health in 2014 produced a document, and it's only this big, that's what I've shown you. It's just 2 pages, just printed off, it's 2 pages, so easy. And it's looking at, and Fiona Cram actually was leading this, and it's around what we can do as in the health system, health organisations, health practitioners, through leadership, knowledge, commitment, and it really gives a prescription of what we should do. And one of the things there is about learning te reo as a health practitioner. So I feel excited by my own learning, and I aspire to learn a lot more. Thank you. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Anis. Kia ora tātou, me ngā mihi nunui ki a koutou, kua hui hui mai i tēnei wā. Tēnei te mihi ki a koe paparangi mo tō karakia mihi ki a mātou i tēnei ata. Ki a koutou katoa kua tai mai, ka tino hari ko te ngākau ki te kiti a koutou e tautoko ana i tēnei kaupapa no reira, tēnā koutou, kia ora tātou. Ko wai ahau, ko Reese Jones tōku ingoa, no Ngāti Kahungunu ahau. Kia ora everyone. For those who don't know, my name's Reese Jones. I'm one of the Māori health team here at the university, and I'm very pleased to be here today. I was the foolish one who was aware that there was a showcase happening this year and no one had put up their hand to run it, and foolishly said, yeah, we'll do that. Not being quite aware of what was involved, but really wanting to make sure that we took the opportunity to actually, as Innes has been talking about, to try to build capacity among faculty, recognising that everyone has a role to play in improving Māori health, and particularly in terms of today's showcase, everyone has a role to play in terms of teaching and learning and supporting our students and learners and junior health professionals in their journey to become more culturally safe and to improve Māori health and reduce inequities. So kia ora to everyone who's come here today, and hopefully with that kind of goal in mind. If you haven't, maybe you're in the wrong place, feel free to leave now. No. I'll get into my session here, but just to kind of position us, which I think Paparangi and Innes have already done this morning, really just to kind of make the point that we're not talking about warm fuzzies and nice cultural luxuries here. This is about life and death. This is about inequities in healthcare and in health that Innes has already given us some examples of this morning that breach human rights. So just to keep that in the back of our minds as we're working through the session. Now, I called my session the why, what, how, who and when of Māori health curriculum. And I think it's probably important to take us through these steps to say, what's the rationale for doing what we do, for having a Māori health curriculum. And what I'm going to try and do today is give a very broad and generic sort of overview so that this could be something that's applicable to medical students, to nursing, to pharmacy, to essentially anyone in our faculty and potentially other students who are learning about health professions or training to become health professionals. So the first question I wanted to pose is, why do we have a Māori health curriculum? And yes, believe it or not, some people have asked me this kind of question. All right, sorry. I think you're probably already well aware of the answer to this question, and basically it's about inequalities. The fact that Māori health in New Zealand is characterised by systemic inequities in health outcomes and determinants of health, and in the way that the health system responds to those issues. So access to care and quality of care. We know there's differential treatment in the healthcare system. And yes, we as health professionals are part of that problem. So we contribute to those inequities. As Paparangi said, sure, there are lots of other contributors, but we have to put our hands up and take ownership of some of that inequity. So therefore, health professional education has an important role in not being part of the problem, but becoming part of the solution. I'm not going to go into this in too much detail, but there's ample evidence of inequalities in healthcare in New Zealand. Certainly there's huge international evidence of ethnic inequalities in healthcare, but these are some of the examples of documented inequalities between Māori and non-Māori in New Zealand. And the conclusion from this review was that there's robust evidence for the existence of healthcare disparities, with Māori obviously receiving poorer quality care in all these examples. Similarly, when you look in primary care, gross inequities wherever you look, Māori receiving fewer referrals, fewer diagnostic tests, treatment, seen for less time than non-Māori patients, etc., etc. And this conclusion here is quite interesting too. So Māori encounter a different health system in terms of the quality of care they receive. So I think that's kind of the answer as to why we have a Māori health curriculum, that the experiences of Māori are quite different, and we need to try and address that. One of the things that I do need to kind of touch on here as we're talking about why we have a Māori health curriculum, the question following up on that always comes in as, well, what about the health of other ethnic groups? And what we would say is that the Māori health curriculum is actually complementary to a broader curriculum around cultural competency and disparities. doesn't discount the importance of other ethnic groups, and particularly other ethnic groups like our Pacific cousins who have also very, very poor health outcomes, but actually seeks to contribute generic knowledge that's going to help students address inequities right across the board. So although it has that generic kind of outlook, it also has a distinct focus that's not captured in a sort of generic cultural competency or inequities curriculum. Partly because it's positioned in a way that recognises Māori as the indigenous population, and therefore focuses on indigenous rights as one of the reasons why we're looking at Māori health, and focuses on how can we address Māori health in that context. So if you want a very simple kind of diagram of what that might look like in terms of a curriculum, we would see those things as overlapping, so that, as I said, Māori health does contribute some generic competencies that are going to be useful, not just when thinking about other ethnic groups, but when thinking about cultural competence more broadly. That includes, not just ethnicity, but also many other dimensions of culture. In some cases, the overlap might be more than that, and some less, but you kind of get the idea. Okay, so that's why we have a Māori health curriculum. Hopefully everyone's with me so far, and we don't have too many doubters out there still. Next thing I wanted to address is what the Māori health curriculum is trying to achieve. And really, it goes back to that idea of equity. So what we want to do is to try and develop competencies that are going to help our learners improve Māori health and reduce inequalities. So we've tried to orient our curriculum here at the University of Auckland towards those things that address health professional factors that have been shown to contribute to inequalities. Okay, there's a whole lot of literature out there, maybe not as much as we would like, but there's literature that says these are the types of factors that contribute to inequitable healthcare and differential treatment. And what we're really focusing on in that curriculum is learners being able to critically reflect on their own culture and the system and the profession that they're entering. So I need to kind of address a common misconception here, and that is that Māori health is a cultural part of the curriculum. It's about cultural learning. What I would say is that it's not learning about Māori culture. There are a number of problems with that kind of approach, and particularly, maybe when I went through med school, cultural competence was more about, learning about different cultural groups. Hopefully we've moved on quite a bit since then. That sort of approach can lead to stereotyping assumptions and a sort of a categorical approach where you see a Māori patient and assume that they're going to fit into this nice paradigm of what a Māori patient should look like in your according to your teaching about what Māori culture is. It can also lead to this, what I've called othering, which is about, a perception that there's a kind of normal way of being, which is the, Pākehā way of being, and everyone else is othered and is sort of aberrant or abnormal. And teaching about different cultural groups can reinforce those kind of, that sort of othering, that us and them type approach. So we tend to not go down that track. What we see the Māori health curriculum as is much more learning about ourselves. And so it's highlighting the power, relationships, inequalities that exist within healthcare, and really getting students to put themselves in the picture and to focus on their own lived experiences, their own culture, the system around them, and how that impacts on their practice. Okay, so given all that, what do we see as the key competency areas for the Māori health curriculum? I'm only going to have a chance today to give a very broad overview of this and to talk about some of the key competencies or key attributes that we would see as important for students to be able to address Māori health. So these graduate outcomes come from this thing called Te Ara, which we quite a few years ago introduced here in the Faculty of Medical and Health Sciences. And it's supposed to be a graduate profile which all students, regardless of which program they're in, should be able to achieve these outcomes by the end of their undergraduate program. So whether they're in medicine, nursing, pharmacy, etc. And they're framed in a sort of generic way. But as you'll see there, they're very much focused on, you know, critical understanding of inequities, self-reflection, you know, monitoring their own practice against Treaty of Waitangi obligations, etc. Not focused on, you know, learning Māori language and culture and those sorts of things. That may have its place, and I may even talk about that a bit later, but the key focus is on how can I as a health professional contribute to more equitable outcomes. So I'm just going to pick up on a few of those areas, and Paparangi will also expand on one of them in a little bit more detail. But essentially one of the key foundational things that we really want our students to understand is around determinants of inequalities, how we've come to the position that we have with those graphs that Ines showed, where Māori are disadvantaged, where Māori have poorer health outcomes and Pākehā have much better health outcomes just about wherever you look. And to really challenge some of the common sense and some of the, you know, usual ways that people explain those things, which focus on Māori as the problem. And then actually reframing that in terms of, you know, what does that say about colonisation, institutional racism, and the way those kind of processes have patterned the inequalities and have created the inequalities that we see. So this is actually, you know, while it may seem a fairly conceptual and theoretical part of the curriculum, it can be quite challenging because it requires learners often to unlearn or to challenge some of the things that they'd previously accepted about New Zealand society and about Māori Pākehā relations, and also to engage with things like privilege, colonisation, which can be quite challenging. And we'll pick up on some of that in some of the showcase sessions as well, about how do we deal with some of this baggage. So interesting. So what we try to do is use a framework which actually shows how health inequalities are created and maintained. This looks quite complicated, but if you just look along the top row, you'll see the whole idea of this is to go right back to basic causes, right back to the left-hand side. So whatever health issue you're looking at, we don't just focus on the surface causes, the you know, the smoking or the diet or the things that we as health professionals, you know, commonly attribute things to, but then to think about, well, what's driving that, what's driving those behaviours, and then what are the kind of really fundamental social processes around racism, privilege, unequal treatment by institutions and society, colonisation that drive those inequities. Okay, and so a lot of what we do is to try and reframe kind of common sense discourse. And so even in the health sector, you know, sometimes we're guilty of this surface cause type thinking. So this advertisement here, you know, it started with a sore throat. Well, did it really start with a sore throat? I would say it started right back further over to the left-hand side of that diagram and actually started with, you know, differential treatment, poor, you know, leading to poorer housing and a whole range of other things, poorer access to healthcare that, you know, ended up causing obviously rheumatic fever and the consequences of that. So yeah, it's about understanding that there are different ways of looking at things, having a critical analysis of inequities. And so that's one kind of key area of the curriculum, really foundational. Another really important area is engaging appropriately in interactions with Māori. We've started to use, particularly in the medical program, a process called the Hui process, which we've borrowed from our colleagues down at Otago, down in Mihi in Christchurch. So we've got a Mihi to them. And it takes students through various stages of an engagement or consultation with Māori patients. It's intended to complement their, you know, their standard approach to clinical history taking and clinical examination, etc. But it focuses much more on as you'll see there, mihi whakawhanaungatanga, so establishing relationships before you get into the actual presenting complaint, etc. So that's just an example. Obviously, I don't have time to go into that in great detail now, but a tool that we're using to help students in terms of engagement with Māori patients and whānau. Okay, another area of the curriculum that we really focus on is actually students being able to put themselves in the picture, and this is about, you know, critical self-reflection. This recognises that, as Innes was talking about this morning, you know, even though I might not consider myself a coloniser or a racist, I can still contribute to inequalities. And, you know, there are a whole range of very complex relationships that, you know, that result in us potentially practicing differentially and contributing to inequalities. So we have to be mindful of that, and we have to think about how we address those things. Now, I'm going to invite Paparangi up to talk now, just to give you an example of what we mean by this, because sometimes, you know, you might look at a diagram like that and go, ah, and be completely horrified. So what I wanted Paparangi to just talk about was to talk about implicit bias and how that plays out in healthcare interactions. Yeah.
So I'm the light entertainment in the middle of the board slide.
Exactly. Thanks for that.
So if the evidence tells us that there's differential outcomes that are due to differential practice, it's a heavy thing for us to take on board, but we have to own that evidence. Now, does that mean all of us as health practitioners get up in the morning and think we're going to do bad things to Māori people today? And probably not. You know, that is probably not what's happening in the world. So what is happening? What is happening that really good people get out of bed and go to work and do have differential practice? And that's what we want to address. Now, so previously, bias was seen as aberrant and conscious and intentional. And, you know, but now bias is understood as really unconscious and largely unintentional. And because we, everybody, but especially often in busy healthcare practice, we're exposed to heaps of information all the time, and we can only functionally deal with small amounts of it. So unconscious biases, implicit biases come into play. And is it about people who we don't like? No, it's really about people who are not like us. So when we have people who are like us, we understand people who are like us and like our families, and therefore we understand, we engage with them, we communicate with them, we probably understand their needs, we have a similar literacy level, and we have a better relationship with them, and we have better outcomes. And the problem is when people are not like us, we engage with stereotypes of, oh, we've heard about people like, I don't know you, but I've heard about people like you. And that gets us into lots of trouble. And when are these stereotypes, when are these biases most likely to be activated? In situations of high stress, in situations where you're busy, you've got time constraints, when you're often multitasking, and when you need to make a decision. Hello, does that sound like health practice? So we are working, we are teaching students in situations where we are likely to be buying into implicit biases. So in second year in medicine, but we're hoping to extend this further, I invite students to go to this Harvard website, Project Implicit, and to try out and find what their biases are. And you can do all these different sorts of implicit bias tests. You can find out about if you're biased towards age. Believe me, most people like younger people. If you're biased by religion or by ethnicity. And guess what? Most people have negative associations towards age, including those people who are in the age group themselves. That's so sad, isn't it? But it shows you how strong it is. 75% of men and women do not associate female with career as easily as they associate female with family. So, and women show, thank goodness, women show implicit attitudinal preference for females, but we show the same stereotypes. So it shows how socialised we are in our society, if that doesn't sound too weird using the same. Okay, so with race, and it's American, so I use the word race and I don't mean the 100-yard dash. About 80% of white people who've taken it show a white preference, whereas black show a 50-50 split. So again, socialised. Young and old are just as likely to show a race bias, and women as likely as men. Most importantly, you can't educate it out of people. Educational attainment seems to make no difference in respect to implicit race bias. So implicit biases, those biases we have as a reaction to in-group favoritism. People like me, sweet as, I can engage with them, I know I'm less likely to show bias towards those people, but people who are different from me are pervasive. These biases are pervasive. We're often unaware of our implicit biases. They predict behaviour, and amongst us all, we've got different levels of implicit bias. So I encourage the students to go and take some of these tests to find out what their biases are. I said, I want you to take gender and body weight. They all go and do race, just because they've seen me say something, and so they all go and do race, because they just look at my face and do it. And then they try and game it. I said, I think Harvard University has met people trying to game the system before, but never mind. It's not about, you don't have to tell me what the answer is. It's about you finding out about yourself, you finding out about your biases, so you know which parts of your practice to monitor, okay? So when they find out that they've got an age bias, that's the part they should be looking and auditing their practice to make sure the elderly people in their care are getting equitable treatment according to guidelines. So I tell them it's not about me. Well, not for them. Okay, so I'm going to skip over this because what I want us to do is just to get a bit of movement happening in the class. So we're going to do the exercise. And now we've made up this one because the Project Implicit is caught up with quite a lot of IP and whatever. So we've made up, well, Ricky Harris and Donna Cormack made up this one that we're going to play. So, do you want to help me with this, Gula? No? Okay, so, well, talk about helpful. Okay, so we've got insects over here and flowers over here, and we're going to do association. So when, I'm going to put a word down the bottom, and if it's related to insects, you go this one, put your hand up. If it's related to flowers, you put this hand up. Okay? So, ready? Right. I'm going to go next one. Some of you are a bit slow. Yeah. Yep. It's funny to watch this. Rightio. Now we're nearly at the end of this part. Ooh, this is topical. Right, now we're going to bring some feelings into it. So we've got pleasant and unpleasant. Okay. Some of you are a bit slow. Very fast on that one. All relative, isn't it? Yep, we're starting to make a few errors here. Okay, now we're going to put things together. Now you have to make a decision. We've assumed insects are unpleasant and flowers are pleasant, and I just want to acknowledge if anybody's offended by that association. But we're going to go now. Yep. Oh, there's a bit of hesitation here. Right, now we're going to turn the categories around. We've got flowers as unpleasant, insects as pleasant. And this will require thinking. Oh. So, anyway, the purpose of the implicit association test is it measures the time of hesitation to making that decision of the association. So it's something that you can't really fudge. If you just hesitate for a fraction compared to the millions of other people doing it, that elderly and gorgeous not going, if you hesitate when you're putting elderly and gorgeous together, we know you've probably do that, 20 times. We know you've got a little bit of implicit bias happening towards age there. Okay, so that's the process of how it works. And so it's quite interesting, and I encourage you all to think about going to Project Implicit on the Harvard website and having a little go. They do keep your information and they do use it in their research. But you can take a test, you can take a trial. So I'm going to hand back to you, Reese, I think, and you might mention what's happening in sixth year, your research project. Anyway, that was just a bit of light relief.
Kia ora, thank you, Paparangi. Now back to the boring presentation. Okay. And so that's a kind of an interesting example of one thing that we're trying to work on and explore in the curriculum. Paparangi's talked about one stage of that, which is identifying our biases. The kind of more challenging thing, I think, is about, well, what do we then do about it? Considering, like she said, even well-educated, otherwise well-meaning people will still have these biases. So, probably don't have time to talk about that much at the moment, but we will have chance for questions later. One of the things that we can do, though, and that we're trying to encourage as part of the curriculum is actually this continuous reflection on your own practice and actually a monitoring of how you're doing. So that means actually, seeking some objective evidence of how your practice is going, what impact that's having, and what outcomes that's resulting in. So we try to set this up as part of a lifelong learning process, and this is another thing to kind of be very mindful of in terms of Māori health, is that this is not you go through university and you attend these lectures and then you're competent and that's it. You can tick that box and never have to go to another cultural competence lecture again. This is about a lifelong learning process that we have to continually monitor our practice, seek patient feedback, seek actually evidence of healthcare outcomes to make sure that we're still doing a good job, rather than just thinking that good intentions are enough and that as long as we believe we're doing a good job, everything's okay. Now I do have to mention Te Whare Tapawhā here, because sometimes it's a bit of the sort of elephant in the room, and for those of us who perhaps were at university a long time ago and went through our training a few decades ago, Whare Tapawhā used to be Māori health. This is what it was all about, and certainly it does have a place. And it's actually very good for getting students and in fact everyone, to understand that there are different ways of looking at health, different things that people might value in terms of health, and different perspectives on what good health might look like. So that's one thing. So this is not to discount the importance of Te Whare Tapawhā, which everyone seems to know about and trot out whenever you ask about Māori health. But what we've found is that in terms of addressing the inequities and addressing the issues that we've been talking about this morning, it has limited value. So it's useful for part of that, but it has limited value in terms of helping to address the factors that cause inequities. In fact, it's quite a useful tool for us to use, so that in student assessments, whenever they focus their whole assignment on Te Whare Tapawhā, we can be pretty sure that they've just Googled Māori health and come up with that, because that's usually the first thing that comes up, rather than actually properly engaged with the curriculum and what we're trying to teach. So yes, interesting. Okay, just wanted to move on because we don't have a lot of time. To think about how, so we've talked about the why and the what we're trying to achieve and the main sort of areas of competencies, but how do we actually deliver that curriculum in a health professional program? Do we focus on dedicated blocks of Māori health teaching? So people like Paparangi, myself, and a lot of the other people who you're going to hear from this morning, standing up in front of a class or doing tutorials, workshops, etc., with students? Or do we actually try to integrate Māori health throughout the whole curriculum? Well, this is how I sort of look at it, that if we think about maybe a typical health professional curriculum, we have these dedicated blocks of Māori health which make up that little thin slither there of the curriculum. And then everything else is in the blue there, or the whatever colour that is. But it's really important to recognise that students are still learning about Māori health. Even from day one, when they start learning about the epidemiology of different diseases, they learn about inequalities, and they have that either implicitly or explicitly reinforced in terms of what the causes of those inequalities are. When I went through medical school, it was common to have those inequalities attributed to genetic differences or cultural differences. Very rare to hear about social determinants of health and colonisation, racism, etc. So, yeah, we have to be aware that students are learning about Māori health in all areas of the curriculum, but that learning might not be very well aligned with what we're trying to achieve in terms of those learning outcomes that I mentioned. So we have this issue where I think we have to address Māori health throughout the whole curriculum. Otherwise, what we get is a situation like snakes and ladders. So it's like, students might do some great work and sort of advance in their thinking and their competencies at some points of the program, and then they might kind of get out there into the real world and hit a few snakes and do some unlearning. And so that's one thing that we're very aware of, is that there's useful things happening within the formal curriculum, but sometimes those things can be undone within the informal curriculum. So, just to give you an example of this, as I've been talking about this morning, we really try to get students to understand around ethnic inequalities in health and how they're driven by inequities and social determinants of health, and taking it right back to those basic causes, right back to colonisation, understanding how institutional racism operates and how those things create the environments and the situations in which health inequalities occur. Sometimes what students will get in the informal curriculum, this might be sitting in the cafe with their colleagues, or overhearing some people talking in the corridor, really that it's a victim blaming type approach, that people who smoke or eat too much or drink, whatever, those are personal choices. Okay, this is about individual responsibility, and therefore if someone is unwell and that's because of these personal choices, well, it's sort of their fault. And so, although we might kind of laugh at that a little bit. We do still hear that. And we hear our students coming back and saying that they're exposed to these kind of discourses. So really important that we have a way of addressing that, and that we try to, if possible, align the curriculum right across so that students are getting kind of consistent messages. So I think rather than seeing that as an either-or thing, we have to focus on certainly having dedicated blocks of Māori health teaching. There are, you know, some core ideas and competencies that we want to address, but those things have to be reinforced right throughout the rest of the curriculum. And this is why, you know, it's so important to have something like today, where we can try to, you know, at least build some capacity around helping get those things supported right through, whether students are, you know, in other learning areas within their undergrad, within their, you know, lectures and labs and things, or whether they're out in clinical placements. Important to have those ideas reinforced right across. Now, my final question is around the who, and who should be responsible for teaching Māori health. And this is an interesting one that, you know, people might have some questions and concerns about. Our position really is that everyone has a role. Māori health's everyone's business, and that we all have responsibility to address Māori health. So it's really important, and particularly in, you know, clinical contexts where senior colleagues will be role models, it's really important that our learners are able to see our, you know, senior colleagues valuing Māori health, so seeing it as important, demonstrating those competencies themselves, and also supporting the student in learning, as well as assessing the students in those areas. You know, if they're going to be able to assess the students in terms of doing an abdominal examination, they should also be able to assess the students in areas like Māori health. But, and again, I haven't got time to go into this in great detail right here, there are different roles for, I believe, for Māori, non-Māori, and for, you know, those of us who have kind of made it our career to be teachers in Māori health versus others who are, you know, obviously seeing our students, teaching, assessing our students, but have a slightly different role. So interested if you want to explore those things during the time we have for questions. So that's pretty much all I had for the, in terms of addressing those questions. Hopefully I've tried to provide a bit of an overview of what we're trying to achieve and how we're going about that and who's involved. So really just to quickly whiz through what we've covered, why do we need a Māori health curriculum? Well, particularly at this point in our history, it's about healthcare inequities. It's about trying to make sure that we can address Indigenous rights, uphold our obligations under the treaty to create equitable outcomes for Māori. Yep, so it's about trying to achieve equity in a very short way of putting it. What are the key competency areas? You know, really trying to get across the fact that it's not about cultural learning so much as it is about having that really critical analysis of what creates inequalities in health, being able to engage in a culturally safe way, and that's a huge kind of area in itself, but particularly being self-reflective and being, having the mindset of monitoring their own practice and how that's contributing to equitable outcomes or not. So yeah, how should it be delivered? This is really important. It's, you know, it's not something that we can just do in a couple of days here and there through the curriculum. It's something that has to be reinforced right throughout. So, you know, right across all different topic areas, but also at all stages of the program. And yes, who's responsible for teaching Māori health? Hopefully everyone feels like they can be part of the solution, because, you know, I believe everyone has a really important role to play in supporting our learners and you know, and in fact actually developing themselves to be able to address Māori health and to reduce inequalities. So kia ora everyone. Now we do have a few minutes before morning tea for questions. we may have some questions from the folks online as well, but yes, we'll take one here. I think what we are about is about trying to make better doctors and better nurses, better health professionals. And it does go back to the point that I made, that I think a lot of what we're talking about, even though we're doing it through the sort of channel of Māori health, is about creating, or providing some generic competencies, generic attributes that are going to be useful for students and for health professionals, no matter who they're working with, whether it's Māori patients or anyone else. So it's kind of interesting to think about why that's come about and how we've come to be positioned that way, that we're sort of often delivering some of the broader cultural safety, cultural competency, looking at implicit biases from a Māori health perspective, rather than that being done sort of elsewhere within the curriculum. But yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more that I think cultural competency, Māori health, should actually be seen as an integral part of overall clinical competency.
Right. Kia ora, congratulations for the fantastic presentation. I really enjoyed it. My quick question is about who is responsible for teaching Māori health. So the question is, a lot of people who are already in teaching roles or in academia, and they think that they're not competent enough, but they don't need to know everything, but they want to know a little bit of it so that they feel competent enough to deal with some of these things. So do you have some sort of action plan for those things, some seminars, workshops to make those professionals who are already working in academia to learn more about some of these things?
Yeah, very, very good question. Quite a short answer, because I think we are running out of time. We are doing various things around sort of trying to get involved in Teach the Teacher sessions whenever clinical teachers are involved in those sorts of things, to include some Māori health content, just to, at least, as you say, provide a little bit of confidence that it's not a completely mystical area of the curriculum. This is something that people can be involved in teaching and assessing. A little bit later this morning, I'm also going to be talking about an online resource that we've developed that might be really, really useful for the kind of people you're talking about, so clinical teachers and others like them, which actually goes through some of the concepts around Māori health in hopefully fairly basic terms, to see how can clinical teachers support delivery of the Māori health curriculum.
It's sort of like, what does it mean personally for somebody to be Māori? What is Māori in terms of who you are? And in particular in relationship to the other part of your heritage. And I guess I'm sort of interested because I think part of what you see sometimes is a huge disrespect on both sides of Māori for European and non-Māori, as well as what you've just been talking about.
I'd like to answer that because my mother's was an English war bride and my father's Māori. And I love both my parents and both my heritage, so that's my ancestry and I honour both of them. But my ethnicity, how I live and how I socialise and the groups I socialise with and how I identify is Māori. And so that's the difference between my ancestry and my ethnicity. I honour both sides of my heritage. It's not that, I certainly have a very critical analysis of European history in Aotearoa. But I don't hate non-Māoris, I don't disrespect them. It's like children sometimes. I don't like some of their behaviours, historical, current and probably future. Yeah, do you get the difference? And sometimes people can't blur those distinctions, but those are the distinctions between, I don't feel half of anything, I feel well connected to lots of things. Does it make sense?
Dispersal all over the place. We tried that before and we were assimilated, or just about. It was only when Paparangi and her team got together and created a focus, and now we can actually show the benefit of the work that's been done. It's up to the people in power here to actually put it in the right place as Māori health is a New Zealand issue, and how actually I don't want you as clinicians. Thank you very much. You're doing a fantastic job.
I never knew Philippa had so much power, but there you go. I agree with what you're saying, is that we want to be a focus within Māori health, so within the university, but we also want clinical colleagues out there everywhere supporting that. And so it's part of the reason we've got a number of our Māori medical colleagues here today, specially invited, to try and sort of build up that, but also not just focusing on Māori, but trying to extend that out to everyone.